everyone. It looks like it is 8 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to our SPAMinar. This is our monthly online gathering for live theater prop professionals and anyone interested in stage props. My name is Jessica Rosenlieb. I am a SPAM member and the prop shop supervisor of the Cleveland Playhouse in Cleveland, Ohio. SPAM was formed in 1994 to create a fellowship among prop professionals to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production areas. We are an association of professional prop educators and managers from non-for-profit producing organizations and an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and stock. We promote the highest professional standards among prop artisans and craftspeople and the field of props to potential prop professionals, while working to establish educational standards for the training of prop artisans. We now have over 150 active members, reaching from Hawaii to Ireland and Canada to Florida. As with previous SPAMinars, we are requesting a pay what you can donation to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, the link will be put in the chat during the session. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We have enabled live transcript for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on live transcript button on the bottom and then select show subtitle. Alternatively, you can click the view full transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. Tonight, Jen McClure will talk us about how we can make our own stage blood and why we want to make our own instead of purchasing the pre-made products. We'll also take a look at the many different ingredients you can use to create realistic looking blood effects. Perfect for Halloween. Jen McClure is the Properties Supervisor for Yale Repertory Theatre and the David Geffen School of Drama at Yale. She has worked with props, set design, puppets, and mass creation for over 15 years. She is the author of Bloody Brilliant, How to Develop, Execute, and Clean Up Blood Effects for Live Performance, which will be published in the spring of 2022, which is amazing. I can't wait to add it to my prop book collection. I'll be your moderator and host for the evening. Please put any comments or questions you have in the chat. I will gather them up and give them to Jen at the end of her presentation. Be sure to stay at the end to hear about our upcoming SPAMinars and other ways you can interact and learn from the membership. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Jen.
Hey, everybody. So welcome. It's been almost a year to the day since the last one of these that I did where we talked about blood delivery systems. And so we thought this was a good follow-up. And also now that I'm done writing my blood book, this was also really great for a follow-up. So tonight we're going to be talking about making your own blood. So the biggest thing to think about first is why would you want to make your own blood rather than just purchase something that exists? There are plenty of really great products that exist. They're beautiful, they're reliable, they wash out of things, but there are lots of reasons why those might not work for your production. So we're going to talk about those kind of things tonight. The first big thing that happens when you're trying to decide whether you're going to make your own blood is timing. Do you need the items quickly, or do you have time to wait for shipping? If you don't have time to wait for shipping and you need to get it done, then you can go to a lot of food stores or some slightly specialty stores and get the products that I'm going to talk about tonight and be able to make your own blood within hours, if not minutes, of getting all this stuff. So that's really great. Making your own can be really fast. Also, if it's not Halloween time like it is now, and you don't live in either California or LA or New York, you might not have special effects companies and makeup supply companies that you can actually just go and purchase these products from. So if you don't, I don't where I live in Connecticut, again, being able to make your own product is really helpful. Another big thing to think about is cost. So when you need large quantities of blood, making your own can really be the best way to go. If you need a small quantity, just a little smear on a face or a small cut or something, you can buy small quantities of ready existing blood for $15 or $20 and those will serve you perfectly. But when you start needing cups or gallons per performance, depending on how many performances you do, you may need to make your own blood. So some of the pictures that you saw in the intro, there were gallons of blood spilled on the show every night. And we do upwards of 25 to 30 performances, including tech and previews. here at my theater. So if similar to that, you might need to make something instead of paying something like $60 to $400 a gallon for a commercial blood. You can make your own, and sometimes it wind up having it cost less than $25 a gallon. So that's a huge cost savings making your own. Another big thing to consider is if the blood is being eaten, if it's being used in someone's mouth, or if it's being used on the face, especially near the eyes. Anytime that we do effects that either someone needs to have blood come out of their mouth or it's near their face, I always like to make that blood product. You can mix and match, so you could use a pre-made product somewhere else, but if it's something that someone's going to eat, it's very worth it to make your own. We're going to be talking about what ingredients tonight are food safe and what are not, and so that's a really important thing. If you know what goes into your blood recipe, then you can be absolutely sure that the actor will be safe and that you know what they're consuming. And then I think the biggest reason of why you might want to make your own blood is just that you like to experiment and you like to make things on your own. That's what I like to do. So even though sometimes I start with recipes, I often will tweak them or change them. Every show is different. So even if you start with a recipe, you know, it's good to know what you can do to make things differently. So we're going to talk about all those things tonight. So the big, again, first things to consider when you're thinking about which of these products to go with and what to consider are your cost and your time budget. How much time do you have to put this thing together and how much money do you have? The one thing about making your own thing is that it does take more time. So if you have time but not money, this is perfect. If you don't have a lot of time, you would probably consider just buying something. You also want to think about what ingredients are available to you. So like I mentioned, a lot of these you can get anywhere that sells food products, but some of the things you may have to order online. So think about the availability, the time it'll take you to get all the ingredients and make sure those are available within your time frame of your production. And the last thing to think about is just actor allergies and food preferences. Some of the things that we're going to talk about might be allergen triggers. And so you're going to want to make sure that you know both from the actors and the stage crew who's handling the blood, make sure that you're aware of everyone's allergies to make sure that you're not putting something on stage that could cause someone to have a flare-up. Okay, so let's get into this. So rather than starting with just a specific recipe, I want you also to learn about the components of a good stage blood and how they work. So again, like I said, even when I start with a base recipe, I make a lot of modifications. So knowing how each of these bases and the colorants work, I think is a really important thing, and also can help you develop whatever you want to use for your recipe. So let's start to see what we've got here. So bases, these are the thing that make up the majority of your recipe. It's not necessarily the only thing, but this is usually the thing to start with. So our big favorite thing that most people like to start with is corn syrup. This is sort of the tried and true, has been around forever thing that most people hear about horror movies using, and this is kind of where it all starts for when you're making your own blood recipe. You can just add some food coloring to this and then be on your way. It probably won't wash out very well, but you can do that if you don't care about the clothes that you're getting it on. But so you can get Caro syrup. Caro is the brand. Some people call corn syrup Caro syrup just because this is the one of the most popular brands that there is. Get this in giant gallons like this, or you can get it in smaller, more reasonable sized bottles from the grocery store. This typically comes in light color, and then a dark color. So when this says light, it is not calorically light and not more healthy for you. It is just light in color. This is a sugar product. It does not have no high fructose corn syrup, so that's good. But it is sweet. So be aware of that. If your actor doesn't want a sweet base, this may not be the best thing to start with. But this is the thing that starts most blood recipes out. What's great about corn syrup is that it's really thick. So you get this beautiful base that's sort of got a thickness and a translucency that is similar to blood. We can see that we've got a nice kind of thickness here, and it's nice and clear. It's got this very slight yellow color, but that's really nice. So that's one of our standard bases that we usually use. So then another thing that you can use as a majority base is either Hershey syrup or strawberry syrup. Not a lot of people use this, but it's a possibility. So if you aren't familiar with Hershey syrup or strawberry syrup, Hershey's is pretty or just regular chocolate syrup. Again, Hershey's being the name brand. There's a little bit of a thought of using the name brand things means slightly higher quality ingredients. I don't know how true that is. So if you have generic versions of, again, the generic store brand Caro syrup and the Hershey syrup or chocolate sauce, I would say try them and just make sure that it washes out okay. But chocolate syrup on its own is pretty opaque and pretty dark. So what can be nice is that this adds a nice darkness to our blood, whereas because the corn syrup is so clear. So usually we use these together. But you can, again, use this as a base and just add some food coloring to it and then have that be your blood if you're in a real pinch and you just need something really quick. This is some strawberry syrup. So you can see the strawberry syrup is really thin and it's a lot, it's less viscous than the regular chocolate syrup. So you would have to thicken this up a little bit. But it kind of already has some red food coloring in it. So it's already getting you halfway there, which is kind of nice. So you could use this with just a little bit of more food coloring or potentially mix the chocolate syrup into this and get a little bit of a darker base. So those are sort of our two food grade bases that we can start with. And again, these are very accessible at the grocery store. So if you just needed to make a run to anywhere that sells food products, those are easily accessible. So then getting into a couple more specialty types of bases. So if you need to make a really big quantity of blood, like a pool or like rain or like puddles, like again, we saw in the beginning slides, you may need to go with something that is a little cheaper. This you can get and is maybe about $15 to $20 a gallon, and then you can thin it down. So that's not too bad. But if you need tens of gallons or even 50 gallons potentially over a run, you may need something even cheaper. So there's a couple other products that come in. So you can get glycerin. This is a generic bottle that I pumped out some glycerin from. So this was from a company called Bulk Apothecary. But you can get glycerin at a bunch of different places. You can get it as a food additive, but also you can get it at craft stores sometimes as in candle making section and with soap making also. So be aware that if you're using this as a food blood, however, that you should be buying it from a food grade source. So don't go to the craft store and get candle making or soap making glycerin and then put it in something that someone's going to eat. Okay, so if you want to get it from somewhere that's food grade, to be sure that it's okay for someone to consume. So glycerin is really thin. It's almost similar to the strawberry syrup here. So let's see if we can get a good. It's thin, but what it does is see how you get this really beautiful stream that continues and doesn't start dripping. So glycerin can basically make your blood more slippery and make it flow through tubing really well. So if you have an effect that has to be pumped through a system, adding glycerin or starting with a glycerin base is really great for that. If you have something that needs to rain and go through a pump system and then filter through a bunch of small tubing and that kind of thing in small fixtures, glycerin is a really, really great option. And again, you can add some water to this to even thin it down even more. But in a show that we had to have a stream of blood fall from the grid and hit the floor or hit a bucket, and it had to be a continuous stream from about 16 feet high, the glycerin is what was able to give us this beautiful continuous stream. Be aware that this on the floor though is a little slippery. So corn syrup is really sticky, and that can sometimes be not so good, but sometimes it is good. So however, if you're using any sort of blood that gets on the floor or anywhere on the set, I wouldn't recommend using a glycerin base because it gets pretty slippery and it takes a while for it to be cleaned up. So be aware that that's not a good option if you're doing a lot of dancing or a lot of action throughout the show. So for example, the big puddle that you saw at the beginning of the show or at the slides, we were looking at a glycerin base for that because it had to pump through a system, but we actually chose instead to use a Caro syrup, corn syrup base, because even though it meant that the floor might be a little sticky, we were willing to deal with that stickiness because it would give the actors a little more traction rather than a slippery base, okay? And then the final thing that we often use for when we're doing big effects is methyl cellulose. So methyl cellulose is a food thickener, Well, it's a thickening agent. It can be used in food. It can also be used for glue and wallpaper paste and that kind of thing. So you can get this. Here's a container that was a food source supply. I like this function gelification, very scientific. But so this is a food grade kind, and also this that comes from City Chemical is a food grade kind. But this kind you can get at art stores, and this one that says like acid-free archival quality, this is for glue. So even though in theory these are the same material in here, don't use one that's not labeled as food grade, again, for something that someone's going to use. So you can easily get this at an art store, but I wouldn't recommend it. So you can also get methyl cellulose at some specialty food stores, some vitamin stores, and again, it's used just as a food thickener. So you might see it as a labeled in a different way, but you can add it, it's a powder, and you dissolve it in hot water, and then you can add it to things to make them thicker. So what's nice about this, probably most folks haven't seen this, so I mixed up a few different batches of this just to show what it looks like. So this is 1 tablespoon to 2 cups of hot water. So if you think about it in the ratio of like a tablespoon to a cup, this is sort of half a tablespoon to 1 cup, okay? So this actually has just a little bit of a, let me see if I can like catch this on my arms. How this kind of drips a little, but then it kind of hangs. That's nice. We like that. We like where it can kind of coat things and then hang out for a little while. This would be something that would be really great if this had some food coloring in it to really coat my hand or really kind of drip nice and slow. So this is actually a pretty good base if we were wanting a drippy blend. This one is starting to get a little thicker. So this is 2 tablespoons of methyl cellulose to 2 cups of water. So this is getting real nice and thick. Look how nice and gooey. Yeah. So like this is also great for stuff that isn't blood, other goo, you know, other sort of organy business. If you needed to kind of mix some organs and have some gelatinous business around them, this is really great. And again, nice and clear. So just a little bit of colorant can have it look like something real nice. And then this last one is like the overkill one. So this is 4 tablespoons to 2 cups of water. And this is just like pure snot slime, which is really great. So again, this gives you something that you can actually like pick up and have do some really cool, great stuff. So even if this wasn't blood, you know, alien goo or snot or other things, this is a really great option for all those kind of things. And then you can mix and match a lot of this stuff. So a lot of the recipes that exist use some of each of these things or these in different ratios to each other. So I think it's really interesting to play with them and to know kind of what does what and to see, okay, I need something kind of thick, but I need it to be a little sticky, but then I need it to kind of flow through a tube. So maybe I could add a little bit of glycerin to thin it down instead of just adding water, because water will just thin it and just make it thinner, whereas the glycerin will still keep it kind of together in a long stream. So knowing kind of what each of these things does is really beneficial. And again, most of them, except for the chocolate syrup, are completely clear. So then you can modify them with whatever color you want and whatever color you need your blood to be. All right, so that's a great segue into colors. So everybody's probably familiar with food coloring. Food coloring comes in lots of different options. You can get small little bottles. We're probably familiar with a bunch of these little friends from, you know, egg dyeing or that kind of thing. But you can get bigger bottles, and you can specifically buy big bottles of just red. Now food coloring has been coming in pastes as well. So let me just squeeze some of this out to show you that these paste colors are just a little bit thicker. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's gonna make a wire out. There we go. So these are a little bit thicker colors, which can be helpful because you don't need a lot, but they stay where you put them. And for whatever reason, the gel food coloring tends to stain less. I don't really fully know what the science there is, but in my experience using the gel food coloring, and this AmeriColor brand is really wonderful. So this is the color that I recommend if you're going to be making lots of them. But again, I think it's worth it to test it. If you can only get McCormick brand or can only get you know, what's at the store. Try it, test it, see if it's going to work for you. Okay. So again, food coloring also really great for if you need something that someone's going to eat. Most of these are made for food coloring, right? So you know that they're all food grade materials that you're going to be able to put in something that someone's going to put in their mouth. All right. So then what's next? So then we have tempera paint. So this might seem a little crazy, but especially for big recipes when we need a lot of blood, you can use tempera paint as a colorant. So tempera paint is like sort of a kid's poster paint. It typically dries kind of chalky looking and it's really opaque. So you don't need a lot of this, but that's helpful because then you don't need a lot of it in your colorants. But you can get this at most craft stores, which is helpful. Because this is paint, this is not something that you would want to put in any sort of food, any sort of blood in the mouth. But I would recommend that if you're going to use this, get a red and then also get some of the other complementary colors, a blue or a purple, maybe even a brown or a yellow, because the color of this is like electric red, right? And kind of not, you know, not really real. It's very, very bright, very vibrant, and probably not what your director is going to want to see. However, if your director does want an almost hyper-realistic, really bright, vibrant blood, this might be what you want. And in a production that we had to have people covered in some sort of blood, we used a methyl cellulose base so it would really kind of stick to their body and not fall on the floor. And then we used tempera paint as the colorant because the director wanted almost an electric color, something kind of unnatural, but still red. So, you know, if that's what your director is looking for, then this could be a good option. I would try a couple different brands too. This Versa temp brand is just what locally was available to me. But if you were going to do this, again, I would test it and make sure that it washes out of the costumes and that kind of thing. Okay, so then next is lake pigments. So lake pigments are something that probably not a lot of us are familiar with, and I haven't even used that much. Lake pigments are often used in cosmetics and sometimes in candle making. So they used to be used for older blood recipes, especially in movies. And a lot of the commercial bloods use like lake pigments, and that's kind of why they wash out so great, because lake pigments aren't a dye. They're like small particles that then don't dissolve into your fabrics. They're really stable, and so they don't stain, which is really nice. But they're super expensive and not readily available just at the store. Some art supply stores, if you're lucky, if you have a good specialty store, might have these. But I don't have anywhere around me locally that has them, so you have to sometimes order them. So you can get, you know, little samples of them to try. But basically, sometimes it comes in a powder, and then also you can get it as a liquid. So here's an example. Sort of a lake pigment that's liquefied. So these are really highly pigmented, which is great because you don't need a lot of them, even though they're expensive. But again, they're kind of hard to test and hard to get quickly because they're just not locally available. But if you can get your hands on some and you're doing a big recipe, they're really, I would recommend trying them because again, that's what a lot of the commercial recipes use, and that's why they wash out so wonderfully. Let's see. Next. Oh, the big thing about lake pigments is to know that sometimes they're labeled as either FD&C or D&C, meaning that they follow the guidelines of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. However, that means that they're approved for cosmetic use, but it doesn't always mean that they're safe to ingest. So again, if you're giving someone that you know they're going to swallow, or like maybe you're making blood syrup for your Halloween ice cream party or whatever, don't use lake pigments because they're not super safe to just fully ingest. So they're okay to use on your face and skin, but not okay to ingest. Okay, so then another great natural option is beetroot powder. So this is actually not even like a good container. This I got it from a health food store close to me, and I was able to just buy a pound. This isn't any particular brand, but beets, although kind of notorious for staining everything, right? Your clothes and all kinds of other things after you eat them. Beetroot powder, the way it's processed, actually doesn't stain. So it's a really great colorant to use if you can get your hands on. Also, it's a really great natural food option. So I've encountered some actors that when we're talking about blood and different foods in a show, don't want any unnatural food coloring, no chemically processed food coloring. And so beetroot powder is a great natural option to be able to use. So here's some mixed up. This is just some mixed up in a little bit of glycerin. So look how it's kind of dark. This probably was about a tablespoon of glycerin and then about a tablespoon of beetroot powder. So there was a lot in there. Let's put some on a piece of fabric so you can really see what this is doing. So this is pretty dark, but you could make this lighter if you just put a little less in there. But it's nice. And again, a really nice natural option. And if you're again needing to ingest anything, it's pretty great. So that's really nice. And it also here, this will be really good. I'll show you some on my skin. It like kind of, it blends out nicely. So even as it starts to drip, it doesn't all go away. So can you see how it still has a really nice red shadow in there, but still holds a nice dark drip. So that's a pretty great coloring option if you can get your hands on some. Be sure to pulverize it really well. Sometimes, depending on how long it's been sitting around or how much moisture has gotten into it, some of the particles can kind of stick together. So you want to make sure that you really mash them down, because once you mix it, it's kind of hard to blend those out, or run this through a blender, and that would help too. All right, and then my final colorants option is, there's a mold making supply company called Brick in the Yard Mold Supply. They're from Texas, and they make this flocking blood. So flocking is small, tiny fibers. You can mix this into paint. You can, a lot of times special effects folks will use this to mix into silicones and skins to give a little bit of a variety to skin tones and that kind of thing. But Brick in the Yard sells specifically, there's a third one that I didn't pull out, this set of these 3 different flocking colors. There's a light, a medium, and then one other really dark color of these. And what's great about this is sort of similar to our lake pigments. This isn't a dye, it's literal fiber that then isn't going to bleed into anything else that you put it into. So here's some mixed, again, into a little bit of glycerin. And this is a little chunky, but so this is again about 2 tablespoons of glycerin and a tablespoon of each of these 2 colors that's put into this. But it's got a little bit of a chunky look to it, which is kind of nice in all honesty, and is kind of more vibrant. But let's put a little on my hand and show you that again, like the glycerin base is making it, kind of drip nicely and do some nice dark things. But then even as it starts to kind of thin out, it still has a really great color to it. So again, what's really wonderful about this is that because it's fibers, there's no staining. There's no risk of staining whatsoever. It just comes off, which is really, really great. The one thing that you want to be careful about is if you have a delicate fabric that you're putting it on. So like this is awesome for effects that are just going to be on your skin, because literally with just a sponge, it comes off really quickly. So if you need blood and then no blood real fast, corn syrup is going to be super sticky. A lot of these other things might stain your skin a little bit, but this stuff is going to just wipe right off, which is really nice. You could even mix this into a little bit of baby shampoo or soap or something, and then it would really kind of glide right off. So that's a pretty great thing. You do need a lot of it to get it to look good. So like I said, this was about 2 tablespoons of glycerin and then 2 tablespoons of this. So you almost need equal amounts of the powder and the amount of liquid that you're mixing. So if you're doing small things, that's fine. If you start to get into gallons with this, it's going to become a little pricey. But this is kind of great if you need, again, quick changes or blood to kind of appear and then go away really, really fast. Okay, so those are colorants. So then additional additives. So let's talk about thickeners. So you might have, you might kind of know what you want your base to be, but it might be too thin. So like we talked about, methyl cellulose is a great thickener, but if you can't access that and you don't have access to that, you can go back to good old grandma's gravy thickener and use some cornstarch. This is gonna make your base a little bit more opaque because it's white. And so be aware that then you're gonna lose some of the translucency that you had from the corn syrup or the glycerin or the methyl cellulose or whatever else your base is, but it's gonna help thicken it. So the same way that you would use this to make a gravy, you wanna mix it into something warm and mix it in a sort of small amount, kind of dissolve this up, make sure you're not getting it all lumpy, and then add it back into the main base. There are other food thickeners too. So there's a whole plethora. Guar gum, this is agar-agar, lecthin, xanthan gum. There's a whole bunch of different food additives. What's nice about agar-agar specifically is this is a vegetable gelatin. So I sort of jumped the gun. So you can also use regular gelatin to thicken stuff if you haven't, made Jell-O in a million years. You can buy just unflavored gelatin. You don't have to actually buy Jell-O and then use this to kind of thicken stuff up. But what's nice is that agar-agar is a vegetable option for this. Gelatin is technically made from animal products. So if you have someone who's vegan and doesn't want to consume any animal products or use animal products, then they may not want to use gelatin, and that's where agar-agar comes in and can help thicken your recipe if necessary. And then there's a lot of old recipes that often said that you could add peanut butter to some of these to kind of make your mixture more sticky and be able to kind of make it almost like a scab and be able to kind of smear it on and have it stay. I've moved away from using peanut butter just because of a lot of folks' allergies to it. So if ever I do that, I prefer to use tahini, which is similar. It's still kind of a thick, chunky paste like peanut butter, but it doesn't have peanut butter allergies. There are folks, however, who have sesame allergies. So again, be careful that no one has a sesame allergy in your cast or your crew, because again, it's not just the matter of who the actor is putting this on. If someone's super sensitive to these things, it can just be that there was residue on a table or something, and it can give them a flare up. And for some folks, it's really not good and can send them to the hospital. So you really want to check, especially if you're using any of these, if there's any sesame or peanut allergies in your cast or your crew again. Okay, so these are kind of our thickening options. And then last big things that we can add are sort of our cleaning agents, okay? So you can add some soap to your mixture, soap or detergent. So you can use laundry detergent. You can get these, clear detergents, or sometimes detergents are a little bit of a color. This one that I had in the shop was green. I really like some of the blue ones that are kind of blue and clear, because then when you add some food coloring to it, it can kind of go a little purple. The green can tend to send your mixture a little bit brown, which isn't really what you want. But what's nice is these are a little bit thicker than water, but they sort of pre-treat your stain. If you're putting it specifically on costumes, they kind of help it from settling because it's already made of soap. You could add food coloring straight to just some soap and use that as your base if you really wanted to, but I tend to not use soap just as a main base, because as soon as you start to do anything with it, it starts to get frothy and starts to make bubbles, and that kind of betrays the fact that it's soap and not blood. But adding a little bit of this to mixtures can indeed sometimes help it wash out. So if when you're testing your blood mixture in the fabrics that you're going to be using or the costume samples and it stains, you can try adding a little bit of detergent and then see if that helps wash your items out. You can also use baby shampoo. Often baby shampoo tends to be a little bit yellow, which is kind of nice. So again, we're getting a little bit of color there before we start. And if something is being used anywhere on the face, if it's dripping near someone's eyes and we have to have soap in the mixture, I use baby shampoo instead of any sort of laundry detergent, because this is okay to get in the eyes if it has to. I wouldn't eat this. I wouldn't have this be anything that you're eating. So just be aware of that. And then there's a few recipes out there that say that you can add coffee creamer. And again, there's a little bit of of talk of, that you have to use the brand name Coffee Mate and that the generic brand doesn't work as well. I don't know if that's true, but we'll say here that you can use coffee creamer to add, and there's a little bit of a thought that what's in the coffee creamer bonds to the color molecules of some of the colorants and helps things not stain as much. And then the last thing that I want to share, just recipe-wise, basically, Larry's one of our SPAM members and made this great new recipe. And a member of his family is a chemist, and so he did a whole bunch of research kind of trying to engineer what would make something not stain, and came up with a base that's called a chelating or a chelating solution. It's spelled chelating, so it looks like chelating, but it's pronounced chelating. So basically, this is a mixture of baking soda and citric acid. And you make this up first, and then you mix all your other ingredients into it. And as long as it stops fizzing, which is when sort of the acid and the rest of everything neutralizes, then that's when it's good. So he then uses a corn syrup base, some tahini, a little bit of glycerin, and then food colorant to make his mixture. But this has been really, really reliable. And so this is the recipe that I've been using a lot when I have to make any sort of food grade blood. This is the one that I've been going to. So we'll share that with everybody, but it's not necessarily worth mixing up right now while we're all together. But what I want to do is, just now that we kind of know what we have, I'm going to just mix some of these things together and kind of see what we can get by just experimenting a little. Again, we don't need a specific recipe. Let's just kind of see where we can get without having any particular one place that we're going. All right. So I'm going to take a little bit of my corn syrup here. I'm going to, so we can see the table a little better. Zoom you all in. Camera technology. Very exciting. Here, we're going to take a little bit of this corn syrup. I'm going to put on gloves because whenever you're mixing blood, it's wise to put gloves on so that your hands don't completely turn red, which inevitably we'll forget to do at some point and then have red hands for a day. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of this. So notice how nice and thick this is. It's pouring. I completely messed it up. So I'm going to do about half what I want to mix, and then I'm going to thin this with just a little bit of warm water. So I got a little bit of warm water here. I'm just going to add a little bit of warm water just to help thin that out a little. And then to this, I'm going to maybe do a little bit of this chocolate syrup. So with this, we're trying to kind of get a little bit of darkness, a little bit of opacity, but not full. So we've probably all cut ourselves, right? And hopefully we have seen more of our own blood than we have of other people's blood. But I would encourage you, if you are interested in this type of thing, the next time that you are around real blood, pay attention to what color it is. Often it's a lot different than what you go to if you don't have reference. So I don't have reference with me right now. But the big thing that when we're trying to match something for a show, we want to find out from our director, what are we really going for? And as much as folks don't like to look at photos of wounds and things, it's worth it to get everybody on the same page of what exactly do you want this to look like. So having some color reference of where you're going is important. But don't forget, because we're doing theater, our lighting designer is going to then blast whatever we make with some different color light. So if they blast the stage with red light, it can enhance whatever you're making. Or if they blast it with another color light, it could make what you're making look really dull. So always be ready that you might have to adjust the color of your blood during tech once you actually get under the lights of the show. All right, so we're just going to try some regular food coloring over here. This is some of the gel food coloring that I squeezed out earlier. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this, a little, kind of see on the edge of my stick. I'm just going to put a little bit of that in with our chocolate sauce and our caro syrup. Now we're starting to get something. Now you can see I kind of spilled some on the table over here, and that puddle looks good, but when I kind of bring it up on the side of the cup, you can see it's still really thin, right? So I'm going to add maybe a little more chocolate to try to get that thinness out. If you just keep adding food coloring, then there's going to be so much food coloring in it that it's most likely going to stain your clothing or something. So that's why using the chocolate syrup or something darker to get you kind of halfway there can be really helpful. So at this point, I've probably added almost as much Hershey's chocolate syrup as I have the caro syrup. So it's almost 1-to-1 now of the chocolate. So I like, as I'm going, to take notes and kind of notate what my recipe is, because even if I don't start with the recipe, you're going to need to know what your recipe is when you're done so that you can recreate it for the rest of your show, right? So now we're starting to get something that's looking a little bit thick on the back of here. Let's see what this looks like on a piece of fabric. So we've got like sort of a microfiber towel here, looking pretty good. So just some corn syrup, some Hershey syrup, and a little tiny bit of food coloring, and we got a pretty convincing blood. And also, let's zoom out real quick. Also, something like completely edible. So I can eat this and it tastes like chocolate. So how great, you can then, again, like drizzle this on your Halloween cupcakes or your ice cream or whatever. But it's very, very sugary for sure. But that gets us something real nice already, right? Let's see what we would need to do to this strawberry syrup to get this to look like something. So I'm going to add just a little tiny bit. Instead of the chocolate syrup, I'm going to add just a drop of blue food coloring. Let's see what that does for us. One might have even been too much because food coloring is powerful. All right, so now we've got like purple alien blood, but not so much good red blood. So maybe I can add back a little more strawberry syrup to try to cut that. Whoa. So still pretty thin. We're going to drop a little bit of the chocolate syrup in here and see if we can't opaque this up a little bit. So the strawberry syrup is another thing that you should be aware of. It can be an allergen for people. Some folks are allergic to strawberries and strawberry sauce. And even though this is a pretty like not natural product and is most likely food coloring, some of the things that they use to get the flavoring are derived from real strawberries. So you have to be really careful if someone has a strawberry allergy, again, in your crew or your cast. So this is looking a little more brown than we wanted. So maybe not the best option. I think this would require a little more tinkering and maybe a little bit of food coloring to get us there. But you know, some things don't work and that's okay. That's why it's good to try some stuff. We're gonna drop a little bit of food coloring, see what it does. So this, I think, is the fun part, is the kind of playing with a whole bunch of things and figuring out, you know, what might do the best thing. I almost always, when I'm approaching a blood project, you know, don't just rest on my laurels of here's the product I've always used. I almost always try what I have used before and then something new or something different, or a couple different products, because depending on the fabrics being used by costumes, depending on the paint treatments being used by paints, Something may wash out beautifully out of the scenery, but not out of the costumes, or vice versa. So you might have to try different recipes to see where you're gonna land. This is kind of looking real purpley. Let's put this on our fabric. So yeah, a little more like purpley brown. But if someone was a really, really light skin tone, maybe this would be okay. That's another big thing to consider is if you're putting blood on someone's skin, you need to consider what is their skin tone, and you might have to have different colors of the same blood recipe, but just different color levels of them if someone has a darker skin tone or a lighter skin tone to be able to show up better. When we did a production of Romeo and Juliet, maybe about 10 years ago, I think we had about 6 different bloods. There were 2 different bloods, a light skin version and a dark skin version, and then we had one that went through one person's costume, and then another that had to go through another tubing system and had to go on another costume. And so there were like 6 different recipes in the show. So again, you don't always have one thing solving all your problems, which is the biggest thing. The last thing that I want to talk about as I kind of play with some of this stuff, I kept saying testing. That's a really important part of this whole process. So once you have a recipe that you're interested in, you think kind of looks pretty good, like, hey, here's our chocolate sauce blood, you know, then you need to take this and start to put it through the paces of what your show is going to do. So if it's just the easiest thing is if something's just getting on someone's bare skin, then you just have to worry about washing it off the bare skin. And that's like the easiest thing to deal with. The hardest is getting it out of costumes and reliably and repetitively getting it out of costumes. Something might wash out for the first 5 times, but then very slowly start to leave a little bit of a haze that you don't really notice those first 5 washes. And then, you know, by show 10 and show 15, there's, you know, the beautiful like white skirt is suddenly turning slightly pink. So it's really good to know what type of fabric things are made of. And if you can get samples from your costume department of what those are, try to do wash tests with whatever product you're using and see if it washes out. Some things work great, some not so much. I found that synthetic fabrics actually don't hold on to because they're not as absorbent, don't stain as much as natural fabrics. But again, a lot of these home recipes that you can make, you know, have a possibility that they might stain. So if something's getting on costumes specifically, that might be where you need to go to a commercial product. But again, if there's a big amount on the floor or something, then you might wind up trying to use something that you can make. So I think that's what I've got. My big thing to say is there's a lot of information here, and I know that there's so much more to share. So please keep an eye out in the spring for when my book, Bloody Brilliant, how to develop, execute, and clean up blood effects for live performance will be out. There will be so many more blood recipes in there, as well as wash testing samples, a whole bunch of information on how to make these, and also lots of information on budgeting and talking to your design team about how to make blood effects from start to finish. So please check that out. And I'd love to hear if anybody has any questions.
It's actually an excellent segue. One of the first questions we had is who is publishing your book?
Oh, so Routledge, I think they used to be Focal Press, but now I think they're just Routledge. Is the publisher. They've done a whole bunch of other theater books, probably most notably in this group, Eric Hart's books, the Fake Food Cookbook, the pattern making book. A whole bunch of our theater friends use them, and they're a great educational publisher, as well as publisher of other things, but they have a big educational and specifically theatrical education publishing department.
Awesome. So I know this was all about making food, but do you have a favorite blood you purchase? Like, do you have a certain person you like to purchase from if you need to buy it?
Sure. So if I can afford it, the best blood that's out there to buy is the Pigs Might Fly Nick Dudley blood. Hold on 1 second. Like this blood is like the industry standard of amazing. However, this is the one that costs $400 a gallon. So, you know, this amount might be about $30 or $40. But if you can afford just this much and this is what you need, then hey, great. But when you start to get into the huge quantities, but if you can't afford this, there are tons of other versions. I do a big compare and contrast in the book of about 8 different brands of blood and what they look like and kind of their costs and what they're good for. So that information is all in there too. A couple of the other big names, Real Blood, REEL blood is another one of the big ones. But a good thing to know is that Real Blood has soap in it, has detergent in it. So it's not a good thing to put in your mouth. Some of the makeup supply bloods like Ben Nye blood has a version that they call zesty mint flavor, so it's like, oh, it's minty, but it's not meant to swallow. It's like if you get it in your mouth and then spit it out, it's fine, but it's not meant to fully consume. So I would be careful using those in your mouth. But I would recommend, if you can't get these ones, if you can't afford this or find this, I haven't ever seen this on a shelf, but again, I don't have like a makeup supply. I can order this from Manhattan Wardrobe Supply, and I like them because they're on the East Coast and close, and their shipping is fast. But you can Google this and find other suppliers for this. So a lot of other makeup supply companies sell this. Alcone is another big makeup supply. Mayron, Ben Nye, a lot of them all have their bloods, and they all look a little bit different, and they're each a little bit different thickness. And I would just recommend trying as many of them as you can, because they're not that different from each other. But some of them do, can stain very specific things. So like this washes out of everything except for nylon. So if you have a nylon wig, bad news, because it can stain the wig. Or if you have like a nylon wig cap under your natural hair wig, then that can stain. So, yeah, this was developed in England, actually, by the folks that worked on, Nick Dudman did the special effects for the Harry Potter movies. So it seems like that wasn't so long ago, but I guess it's probably 20 years ago at this point, right? But this was developed for them. So this is probably the newest product I think that's been around. A lot of the other ones have been around probably since the 70s.
Cool. We just wanted to clarify, when you're talking about the lake, is it lake pigments, L-A-K-E?
L-A-K-E is what you would search to find them. But it's not derived. The word lake is actually derived from lac, L-A-C, like the lac beetle where we get shellac. So they're not all made out of beetle anymore, but lake pigments used to be derived from those beetle shells. That was kind of the base of them. They're not so much anymore, but the name has stuck. So, but if you're Googling them, yeah, L-A-K-E is what you're going to look for.
And then someone asked if mica powder is the same thing as lake powder or lake pigment.
Similar, but mica tends to be shimmery and iridescent. So mica is typically ground up something shiny. So if you have one that says it has mica in it, it's most likely sparkly. So unless you're doing the new Twilight musical, you may not want sparkly blood. But for example, I do have another like lake pigment sample that says mica powder. So this one is shiny. And so this one isn't good for blood things. So be aware that if it says it has mica in it, that it will probably have some iridescence to it, and mica is finer than glitter, but it still has a shine and a sheen to it. But good question.
Someone had mentioned that they had heard that some detergents can bleach out food coloring. Have you ever experienced that?
It's possible. Some detergents do have OxyClean and things in them. So if they have those products in them, then yeah, it can counteract with your colorants that you're using, right? So that's why it's good to test these things and also sort of test them and let it sit overnight, because yeah, you might come in the next day and your blood doesn't look the right color, right? Yes, definitely. That's also a good reason why maybe you might want to use baby shampoo or that kind of thing. Anything that has sort of those like oxidizing things, or if it says OxyClean specifically, we love using OxyClean to help us clean blood out of things. But yes, definitely, it can also neutralize the color mixture before you even get to using it, definitely.
So use OxyClean when you're washing them, but
Correct, yes. Yeah. Yeah, but if that happens in your recipe development, well, hey, you found the detergent that you need to clean it. So hey, great. Maybe you don't even need to add it to the mixture because you know it's going to get it out on the back.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah.
You'd answered this a little bit. Someone had asked which fabrics stain more, and you had said synthetics. And they had also asked, is there any way you could like pre-treat your fabric with like Scotchgard or something to help it? Okay.
Yeah, you can. And maybe I misspoke or spoke too fast. I think I found actually that synthetics stain less because they don't absorb as much. So cottons and silks and those kind of things, if something is going to stain, those tend to stain a little more. Again, not always and not everything. So there's the big thing to know about working with blood is there's no unicorn that solves all your problems, right? If it washes out of this thing, it might stain the other thing. Or if it washes out of here, maybe it's too expensive and you can't afford it, right? So there's always this push and pull of what something does and then what it doesn't do to try to find the right product. And then what was the second half? I'm sorry.
About pre-treating fabric?
Oh yeah, so especially for props and furniture and that kind of thing, if you know that blood or any sort of liquid or something is going to be used near or on your furniture, definitely Scotchgard can really, really help. And also for cleaning up, having an upholstery vacuum, one of the ones that like squirts water and then vacuums it out is magic for costumes and for props. It's tricky on costumes because what it's going to do is it's going to beat up on the surface. So if it's something smooth like a chair or something and blood lands on it, well then it's just kind of going to sit there. But if it's the front of a dress, it's going to be really obvious that it just kind of sloughs off and doesn't actually soak in and get the look that the director is probably going to want. So it doesn't help as much that much. So that's where sometimes we wind up adding a little bit of detergent to be our pre-treater.
Cool. And then we just had a question about how do you decide who takes care of blood in your shop? Because I know at my shop, costumes does all of the blood because it's going to be coming out of their costumes.
Yeah. So it's a great question. It really varies by organization, I think, and it also varies by it can even vary by the way that it's being used. So sometimes the way that I've encountered it is typically props handles the blood where I've worked, but if it crosses the line into makeup effects where it needs to look a certain way to make a wound and it doesn't travel off the face or the skin, then sometimes costumes handles that because it's part of the makeup application. And then if there's a makeup designer, they want to be the one to design that and have that be consistent. So often if it's coming through clothes or getting splashed onto something, that's more prop department. And then sometimes if it's more makeup application, that can be costumes. But again, sometimes it is a matter of who it means more to. So sometimes if the costume department really wants to make sure it's going to come out of their stuff, they want to do all the testing. So it kind of depends on the relationship that you have in your theater. Do they trust people back and forth, or do they just want to do it? It might not necessarily be about trust. They just want to take that responsibility on themselves. So it's always a negotiation, and it's definitely a worthwhile thing to lay out very clearly in the budgeting process of a show. When you're starting the show, who's handling this? So that you don't get to tech and say, I thought you were doing it. I thought you were doing it. Oh crap, nobody's done anything. You want to make sure that you know who's doing it. And again, sometimes there might be so many effects that costumes might handle a couple and props might handle a couple. So it can be different. If there's a really big blood moment, sometimes outside folks are hired in to do that and do only that. If it's a huge blood spray or a very specific a moment or a pool or a puddle or something, neither the props team nor the costumes team might have time to handle and test and really kind of iron that idea out. So that's where sometimes other companies come in to do this kind of thing. So I know here on the East Coast, often when blood stuff needs to be done, we call J&M special effects. Jeremy and Lilith down there are awesome and have done a ton of the blood on Broadway and and are also great resources for when we have questions about things. So yeah, they're great. But so sometimes you hire in an outside person too. The biggest thing again is just a matter of clarifying who is going to do it, and then sticking to that. If you say you're going to do it, then trusting them to do the work and letting them do the testing and trying to get it right, instead of saying yes you do it, but then stepping on somebody's toes throughout the whole process.
Totally.
Yeah.
And a perfect question for one last plug for your book. They wanted to know the name of your book one more time.
Yes, so the title is Bloody Brilliant: How to Develop, Execute, and Clean Up Blood Effects for Live Performance.
Perfect. And
yeah.
that
I'm sure we'll be blasting all the social media places once the pre-orders can be up. I'm assuming, similar to Eric's previous books and that kind of thing, that it will be through Amazon, and there will be pre-orders available and that kind of thing.
Yeah, awesome. That was all of our questions, and it
Great.
Right about on time. So
fantastic. Well, thanks everybody. So this will be up on YouTube. Check it out again. We'll put all the links for where you can buy some of this stuff, and also the affiliate link to Larry's recipe there, so that you can check that out. And like I said, there will be more recipes and so much more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen.
Great. Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, great. So I just have a couple of housekeeping things here to roll us out. Grab your Sharpies and mark your calendars for our next SPAMinar. On November 14th, we'll wrap up season 1 of our SPAMinars with Larry Heyman, professor of properties design and fabrication at OCU School of Theater. He'll be rejoining us to talk about set dressing and how it can make or break a set. We'll also have Jay Lansick with us to do a season 1 wrap up and give us a sneak peek for season 2. Speaking of season 2, we'll be taking a short break in December before coming back in January of 2022 with our first SPAMinar of season 2. If there's anything you'd really love to see us present next year, please let us know in the feedback survey, which will be hitting your inboxes soon. And now some of you are probably wondering, how do I become a member of SPAM? Well, if you're a working prop manager, director, supervisor, master, or some similar title in a nonprofit theater or opera, or you are an educator who teaches prop classes or prepares students for career in props and are interested in joining SPAM, send our membership committee an email for more information. The email address is membership@propmanagers.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links are in the chat. SPAMinar is produced by the Society of Property Artisan Managers, with special thanks to the SPAM members, Patrick Drone, Properties Director and Lecturer at the University of Michigan, Ben Homan, Property Director at Utah Shakespeare Festival in Sierra City, Utah, Stacy Horn-Harper, Properties Master at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts, Nikki Kulas, Properties Master at First Stage in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jay Lansick, Properties Supervisor at Penn State School of Theater in State College, Pennsylvania, Amy Peter, Prop Master at the Theater School of DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois, and Kara Rob Vance, freelance prop manager and artisan in Los Angeles and owner of SD Arts Co. Thanks everyone again for watching. Please keep suggestions coming in. We really love to try to tailor what you guys want to know to what we're going to produce for you in the future. And Prop On, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.